Hello and welcome to the IBF Education Podcast. Well, I'll be talking to non-native English language learners about their experiences learning English and about why they chose to learn the English language in the first place. Today I'll be speaking with Ximena. How are you doing today, Ximena? Are you okay?
Hi, Jacob. How nice to meet you again. I
Yeah, it's
am
lovely to
I
see you.
am so nervous, but I think it is common in every interview because we want to do the best of us. I
Of
think
course. Yeah, we always want to do the best we can. But the
yes,
nervousness will quickly pass. That will go quickly. You give it 10 minutes, it will be okay.
yes.
So, where are you from, Jimena? Where do you live?
Yes, I'm from Montermoso. Montermoso in Argentina is in Argentina. It is on the south coast of province of Buenos Aires. It is a seaside resort where a lot of tourists come here every summer season for relaxing and enjoying the beach.
That's awesome. So, what are some of the typical activities that you can do during the summer months?
For example, you can, as I say, you can enjoy it a lot of hours in the beach. The beach is so nice. The main characteristic of the beach is that it has soft sand and the sea has a gentle slope and its water is warm, which make it a safe place for family and children. And on the other hand, you can visit the beautiful lighthouse and freshwater lagoon,
Oh,
where
wow.
people can fish and spend a nice day. If
That's
the weather
amazing.
if the weather is so nice, yes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. I mean, the weather's luckily is very warm here in Argentina, so
Yes,
it's all good.
yes, yes,
Do you get a lot of people doing water sports like
yes.
surfing or kayaking, those kind of things?
Yes, yes. A lot of people come here to spend the time practicing the windsurf, swimming, and that's yes. In general, that's yes. The weather, the sea is so nice for doing this type of sport.
I imagine. It looks beautiful. I
Yes.
had a look at your town a little while ago on Google, and it really, really stunning
Ah, yes,
place.
yes, yes. On the other hand, you can take some long walk on the beach because the beach is so nice. It has 35 kilometers long.
It's 35 kilometers in
Yes,
length.
more or less. Yes, yes. It is
Right.
so beautiful.
I think that's bigger than the island I grew up on. So,
Yes.
yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing those things about where you live. That's awesome.
Yes.
So, what is your job, Jimena? What do you do for a living?
Um, I'm an English teacher. I work as an English teacher. I have been teaching English for about 22 years, more or less. I prepare a student to get an exam. Some students are interested in getting an international exam, or while others want to take a national exam. Yes,
Ah, fantastic.
yes.
And what kind of age groups do you work with predominantly?
Um, I work in an institute here in the institute. There are different type of group. For example, from children from 6 or 7 years old to teenagers and adults in some cases.
That's awesome. And is there a particular age group that you prefer to work with?
Teenagers, because They have learned a lot for several years, and at the same time they want to learn a lot and about it. I teach them a different subject because we are. I think that they must learn about a different subject, for example, biology, chemistry, geography. Then we study a little bit about psychology,
Hmm.
and I think they can get a lot of vocabulary in order to speak, to express their idea.
That's brilliant. Yeah, some good subject ranges there. That's awesome. And
They yes, they start learning biology when they are 12 years old, more or less.
that's brilliant. I mean, and it's good as well to combine what they're probably learning in school in a native language, of Spanish in your case, with probably something very similar in the English language. That's great
Yes,
for acquisition.
yes, yes, yes.
Brilliant stuff. And when you've been working as a teacher for a long, long time, 22 years, that's a brilliant. So what
More or less.
made you, yeah, I mean, what made you decide to want to teach English as your career?
When I decided to teach it, because when I first of all when I left the secondary school, I decided I went to the university to study a career to get a degree in library science. And there I have to study English and French. Yes,
Ah, brilliant.
and but teacher taught us technical English, not spoken English. Um, that was because they prepare us to understand the context of the book
Hmm.
in order to classify them in the correct nomenclature. And then I did English got my attention, and I decided to focus on teaching English, learn a lot, and teaching English.
That's brilliant.
I like a lot my job. I enjoy it a lot because I am permanently in contact with children and teenagers, and it is like a challenge every day. Every day, yes.
And would you say that the children are quite excited to learn English?
Yes, they like and they enjoy a lot, because we make different activity. For example, read a novel in English about a different age. And then we go to the computer room to write some question, and then they have to answer the question, and in order to understand. It is so nice for me, and for children is the same. They enjoy a lot coming here.
Yeah, and that's one of the best ways to make sure that I found anyway, that to ensure that you understand the context of what you're reading is question the story afterwards. What happened at different points in the story? To have a really good idea about what happened in the story, you must be able to think, okay, this is what happened at the beginning. These are the events that transpired, and this is what happened at the end. Um, and if you can't answer one of those questions, you need to go back and reread it and find out what is the bit of information that I haven't understood here. And that's just
Yes,
brilliant for vocabulary acquisition in particular.
yes, yes, I agree with you. Yes,
It's very, very powerful reading books. If you're not reading books, it's highly
yes.
recommended when learning a language.
I think that the reading book it is so important in order to improve our knowledge and go on learning about a different topic. I think it is so important.
Completely agree. I mean,
At the
like,
same time, I think it is important because As you know, we learned repeating, copying, and we can, if you see the same structure, the same topic, you want to copy this type of writing, yes, and I think it
Definitely.
is so important.
Yeah, we talked about this in one of our classes a little while ago, but it's really, really important to ensure that you're getting the same vocabulary, but in so many different contexts as possible.
Yes. At the same time, it is a good way that children and teenagers learn different grammar rules, reading a lot.
Yeah,
Instead, obviously, they need to learn how to use different verb tenses in order to make a good question, so that the other person can't understand us.
yeah, that's an interesting point. Definitely, reading definitely helps naturalize grammatical rules for the brain. That's certain. I'm of the mind though that you don't need to reinforce grammatical rules at all. I've played around with this idea a lot, and I found that in if people just read and they really get excited about the story, they just naturally apply the grammar rules directly into writing as well. It's such a natural progression. Uh, Unless you're an English teacher who has to teach it, the grammar rules, in my case, I think even for writing are irrelevant. I mean, I think we were talking a bit about this yesterday, but with writing as well, I mean, your unique writing style is created by the things that you read and the people that you copy. This is why in schools generally, I'm not sure if they do this in Argentina, but in England, they used to make us write a lot of different types of writing, such as letters or stories or
Yes,
articles in somebody's personal style using their kind of character note. And this is really interesting because you had to think like that person, but what happened naturally through that process is that you created your own writing style as well, because you've taken everything that you learn about the way that person writes, and you've started to implement it into your writing. So then, if you do that with a couple of different people that you're following and that you really like, you create your own very unique style, and it's really, really rewarding. It's a lovely,
yes,
lovely experience.
yes, I couldn't agree more. And the most difficult part of learning English, in my case, is when children or teenagers must ask a question. For example, they don't used to using the auxiliaries, or something like that. They only say, for example, what I learned, for example.
Yeah.
No, it is very difficult to teach them that they need to use an auxiliary.
Yeah, this is where grammar doesn't help, in my opinion. I think
Yes,
because
yes.
especially things like auxiliary verbs and modal verbs, they can be very, very complicated for a Spanish, a native Spanish student learning English to
Mm,
comprehend because they're so different to your native languages. I think it's the only way you get this is by the repetition
by
in a
repetition.
conversation.
Yes, yes,
Like, I don't think it's good enough as well to just repeat the grammar and say this is how you form a question, and because there's no context there, not really, not something that's useful. Because one of the key things that's I think it's probably one of the most important things in language acquisition
yes,
is that
yes, yes,
it must be relevant. Everything
yes.
must be relevant no matter what you do to your life, and that's very personal. Language is a very personal journey in that respect.
They want to find a link between the Spanish, in this case, or English. Why do you use auxiliary to make a question? It, because it is, and they don't understand it. It is so difficult to to get the auxiliary in question, for example. Well,
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to kind of think about as well, why we use auxiliaries in that respect. I mean, um, I've studied a lot of Middle English and Old English, and I mean, auxiliary verbs are a very late thing in the
yes.
English language evolution. Um,
And
Generally, it seems to be politeness.
excuse me, phrasal verbs too, because they don't understand phrasal verbs.
It's purely
In
context, phrasal
in
verbs.
in our language, we don't have any of them.
You have phrasal verbs,
For example,
but they're normally just one word. They're not a sequence with some form of particle like we have with prepositions or adverbs, right? But there's definitely sometimes when I listen in Spanish, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know sometimes when I go to the shops or I'm communicating with people here that they'll say something and I'd be like, I've got no idea what you just said. And it was one word that when they explained it a bit more, I'm like, oh right, that's like a big expression for me. And you have like one singular word that does it.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think the teaching English is so nice work, and at the same time, I enjoy a lot it, and I wanted to go on doing
Yeah, it's a very rewarding career for
it.
sure.
Yes, yes,
I agree with
yes.
that. But yeah, I think one of the things that maybe you can, one of the things that I think is really important, going back to auxiliary verbs in particular, is um, you have to take note of the pace and the syllables and the intonations
The
when
intonation,
using auxiliaries and verbs.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
For example, some students say, I want to be a lawyer, for example. No, you have to make an expression. I want to be a lawyer or something like that. But they say it in a flat way only. They don't use expression. I think expression is most important that everything in a conversation. Yes.
Completely agree. There's a lot of studies that have been conducted on this actually, and they're very, very interesting. But the summary of them is when if you speak in a monotone level,
Oh
nobody is interested at all
no.
in anything you have to say. You're they did some brain scans when people were talking at different intonation levels, and they were testing um, how recipients of this conversation reacted in terms of neurons, right? And what
Yes.
they found is that when people spoke monotone,
Oh
everything was pretty much flat, very little movement, right?
yes.
But when
It
you
is.
added injections of intonation, the brain switches on and off. And this is something really important because it told us two things really, is that to make something enjoyable, you've got to sell it. That's really, really important, which is
Yes.
something we can
Yes.
all agree with.
Yes.
Um, but also I think what's more important is that you don't have to understand every or listen to every single word somebody says to understand the context
The
of the
context.
question,
Yes,
because our
obviously.
brain switches on and off all the time, so maybe pick up one word and not the next, and so forth. So it's not a matter of how a lot of people would say it's translating direct word by word representations, well, it doesn't work that way in language at all. Our brains just don't function in that capacity. They
Mm.
generalize the idea based on our previous context, and then we just assume that's the question that's asked. So it's
Yes.
very interesting
Yes, at the
science.
same time, I think it is so useful to connect for example, a paragraph with a picture.
Yeah, picture recognition can be a really, really good tool.
Yes, yes.
Um,
For example, if I ask them, I show them a picture, and then I ask them to make a story about the picture, different situation, thinking about a different situation, topic, or something like that. I think it is so important to reinforce their brain.
Definitely. I think the key thing though that where I think a lot of people go wrong by using pictures is they say they see the picture, but they automatically think in their first language. So they never get the association with
Yes,
the target language, right? So it's um it's actually better. It's a better practice for anybody who's started learning a language or really wants to improve their vocabulary from say the B2 C1 stage. One of the key ways of doing this is don't ever use a translator or don't ever try to associate in your first language. The best way to do this first is generally focus on things that you wouldn't ordinarily talk about in your primary language and think about or find topics that are commonly spoken about in other languages. So there'll be a real disconnect from your first language to a second language, right? And
yes,
this could be quite an interesting way to do it. This is something that I've been realizing is that we talk about different things generally in different cultures. There's kind of like maybe five key conversations that always happen, right? Like for
yes.
example, in Argentina, it's about inflation, or
Yeah,
um,
oh, yes, these
that's the
are
big
big
one, right?
problems. Yes, yes.
But in England, maybe it's the weather, which no one
Yeah,
really talks
oh,
about here.
yes,
So finding those kind of those culturally different topics and starting there to kind of have a bit more dissociation from the first language is going to be really, really important. It's a really good strategy to implement.
yes,
But
yes.
I like that.
About it is I think it is so important to start learning English or any or some language when you are a little child.
Yeah, I mean it's easier in some respects and harder in other ways. So
Why?
yeah, so well, when you're a child, you have no life experience. And so in order to, you have to work harder to get vocabulary because first you've got to try and understand the situation. Then you've got to start applying the vocabulary to the situation and understanding it in that context. And then you have to have had that situation happen enough that you're able to then use that vocabulary in that situation. I actually think children become very, very fluent in languages when learning from a very young age just because they've had to go through this whole process, so they feel a lot more comfortable expressing their ideas in general. um but adults, I think, are quicker at learning languages, more so than children. I mean, children have 18 years
More or less.
through
Yes.
schooling and just being a child, really, that they can use to understand and explore these different contexts. Whereas adults, they already have all this experience. They've already gone through it in one language. They don't need to know all of that context over again. They've just got to get the association. So it's a quicker process for adults to learn
Yes.
language. The only disadvantage I think adults have over children
Anxious.
is
Anxious.
anxiety. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
anxiety is a really big
yes,
one. Yeah, children
yes.
copy and adults don't want to copy. Those are two
Mhm.
big differences.
Yes,
Um, Also time.
yes,
Um,
for
Time is the
sure.
big one. I mean,
Yes.
you. I think there's a common myth out there, and you probably experience this all the time as a teacher. Like, um, how long does it take me to get to this level of English?
Yes, yes,
I mean,
yes.
and you. I mean, okay. My question always back to people is, well, how long does it take to learn your first language?
They want to learn and at the same time speak in a very short time. For example, when they say, I want to learn English, how long is it going to take it? 1, 2, or 3 months? Oh, only 3 months? No,
Uh,
no.
What did you know in 3 months of learning Spanish, really?
Yes, I tell them that I am an English teacher, not a magician woman.
Yeah,
Yes,
I don't work miracles. That's it. Yeah.
yes, yes. I would like to take pills, so that I give them to drink it and start speaking English. It would be a
Yeah.
good way. Yes,
Oh
yes,
yeah, if we could all take a pill or something that gives us that ability, it'd be
yes,
amazing, wouldn't it?
yes,
We'd be out of the job, which would be the bad thing, but
yes.
No, it's a very I feel this is a lot to do with the advertising that's pushed.
Yes, yes, of
Sure.
course. Yes,
It's a
yes.
big problem. Big problem.
They promised speak English in a very short time, like a native English. It is
Yeah,
it is terrible when I
it's
hear
really
it.
bad. I can't stand it because then people get in contact with you and they say like, I want to learn English and I need it now. And it's like,
Mm.
I mean, like, how long did it take you to learn your first language? Is your first question.
Phew, a lot
But
of
your
time.
whole life,
Oh,
you're still learning now,
yes,
right? You're
yes,
still learning
yes,
new vocabulary and new ways to
yes.
express yourself. Nobody's perfect in language.
And on the other hand, we are listening, speaking every day, and they only want to learn English with 2 or 3 lessons during the week. It is impossible.
Yeah, because the time is the most important part. You must have that
Yes,
exposure. This is one of the biggest inhibitors of adults learning languages later. Is that it's the time issue, because you can people can excel very quickly as adults and learn a lot of vocabulary in a very short amount of time. But there is a limit to how much your brain will be able to recall and use. Because you can't just store all of that information and make it all relevant that quickly. So I think one of the biggest inhibitors always for adult learners is time. Time's
it's that.
so important. You'll get
Yes,
to a point somewhere between the B1 and the B2 level if you're starting from an A1 perspective, where you just won't progress anymore. But that's absolutely fine because that's exactly what happens to you, say from the age of 5 as a child. By the
yes,
age of 5 as a child, you probably know around 4 to 5 thousand words in your primary language,
yes,
and it's a slower progression from that point onwards.
yes, obviously.
Um, so yeah, it's a really difficult one. They market things very wrong within the language sector, and I really don't like it. Um, However, I would say this though, I do think it is entirely possible to express your ideas about particular topics that you really enjoy and are very passionate about within a month or two. I think that's entirely possible. But
Mm,
everything is going to be focused just on that one thing, which I think is a better way for adults to learn because I mean, I deal with working professionals like yourself, right? So
yes,
they, their main need is not is not to speak about everything they speak about Spanish. They need to be able to speak about the things they need for work. So you can kind of target the vocabulary and the situations that they're going to be experiencing and focus on that and only that. And you can become very fluent very quickly in regards to that conversation. Um,
yes, yes. A conversation is so useful, so useful.
yeah, it needs to be so specific though. That's what's missing in a lot of people's minds is the specificity. What is the actual target? What are you trying to speak about? When you're an adult, you don't have, I don't think you have the luxury to learn in general because most people learn languages as adults to further their careers, or to go on holiday somewhere and try and communicate with
Yes,
somebody, right?
yes,
Nothing really outside of that. It's not a
mm,
natural progression that you're always going to be around.
yes. Um, I was thinking about my work, my job. I try to connect this conversation with my experience. For example, if you ask me if I have a lot of opportunity to speak English, my answer would be yes, of course, because I am an English teacher, but not in the way I would like. Despite being always speaking in English, I realized that I have lost my fluency, for example. I think it is because I must teach students, explaining, revising, correcting them all the time.
Mhm.
And sometimes when they don't understand at all, in order to save time, I must explain to them in Spanish in this case. And if I want to tell you about my experience, it happened to me that when I am in class with you, or I talk to someone in English, I am constantly focusing on people's mistake or my mistake instead of focusing on the conversation itself. Yes.
This is the problem of being a teacher. You
Yes, yes,
hyperanalyze.
yes. Oh, oh, it is horrible. Also, when I have to speak in English, I focus on my spoken English.
Yeah,
How I speak, how I pronounce, how many words or grammar rules I use, and if use them properly, or I do it in order not to make any mistake. I am like a judge. You can imagine how it gets on my nerves and how
I can
much
get you.
pressure it put on me.
And it's one of those things. I mean, this is one of the things about being an adult as well, right? Is that you want to be as competent as you possibly can be because you know that's valuable in the world to be competent in something. But I don't think it applies to languages in many sense. I mean, one of the things that a lot of my students tell me all the time is that they don't want to speak Tarzan English, is what they say. And I
Yes.
think that's a really interesting expression. Okay, so you don't want to speak kind of broken English is the correct way of saying that. Um, and I was thinking, do you know what? I've spoken to England is a very multicultural country and it's very cosmopolitan. I've probably spoken to people from near enough all walks of the planet in some regard. And I think the most important thing, even with those who couldn't speak English very well, we still had a very enjoyable conversation. Why?
Yes.
Because the idea is the most important part always. Even for natives and languages, it doesn't matter if you're a native Spanish speaker or a native English speaker like me, you make mistakes when you're speaking, but nobody even recognizes them really because the
No, no.
conversation's so enjoyable. So
Yes.
it's always better to, you're going to make mistakes, and that's absolutely fine because that's no different to anybody else. Now, if you're really the issue that I have is if you're trying to translate, that's a
No.
big problem, right?
Yes, obviously. Yes.
So that's what needs to be avoided. But that teaches you a lesson. Said, okay, well, I don't have all the vocabulary that I need right now acquired to say what I want to say. Okay, so first process really is how do I go around the idea? Because somebody will probably tell you the word just naturally in conversation to speed things
Yes.
along and help
Yes.
you in that regard, right? People are
Yes,
probably
but
tolerant
it is
of
so
speech.
important to express in a right way your ideas.
As long as you have the repetition beforehand. I mean, um, I always use this analogy. If you went on holiday and you return from your holiday and you speak to 10 different friends over 10 days,
Yes.
the first day you're going to have a really bad discussion because you don't know how to explain your holiday yet. You're probably not going to say it in an ordered fashion because your brain doesn't know how to order this information yet because you've not
Yes.
asked it to. So
Do you
you'll
believe
probably,
that?
oh, 100%, it happens all
Yes.
the time. So you'll find that the most people will start talking about, like, for example, the most important things that happened on the holiday, and they're unable to express why it was so good. So generally
Yes.
speaking, most people walk away very unsatisfied from that conversation. So naturally, neurologically in your brain is trying to find, okay, how do I refine this to make it better so I get a better response from
Yes.
other people? It's the socialization aspect. So in the second, third, and fourth time you speak to those friends about the holiday, you will start to articulate the best way or best structure in which that you can say this. So you'll order the events chronologically, um, and then emphasize importance on the most important events that are happening. By the fourth time, you've got bored of telling this story, right? So
Yes.
five, six, and seventh repetition is probably going to be finding better words to use. And sometimes this is where things get a bit, this is where you verbalize a lot more. You get a lot more exaggerated about things because it's more interesting. Um,
Yes,
and eventually, by the end of it, by say 10 repetitions about the same topic, you've really found the way that you want to say it with the specific pieces of vocabulary that encompass everything that you want to say. But it's a process and it's a journey. And this is why you can't just copy how a sentence is said. You've got to have the same conversations repeatedly, um, and reinforce the ideas by finding the best ways to say this. And it's something that happens very naturally in conversation with us.
yes, yes, obviously, yes. When, for example, when you are describing your last holiday, you can. It is like a painter. You have to add different tones, different description in order
Hmm.
to create a general idea about your last holiday, in order to be so interesting the listener the listener can could travel to this specific place, for example, to spend a nice holiday like you. I think a conversation, a description is like a painting, like a painting.
It's the story of the painting, you could say.
Yes, yes, yes,
I believe everything's a story that you tell. So, and
yes.
stories have a process of being formed.
You are
And
creating.
yeah, you're creating, even if it's based on your own experience. You want to
Yes,
get gratification from somebody about what you're saying. You want your thoughts and opinions to be heard. I mean, that's the social aspect of being human. So it's best not to focus on speaking perfectly to start with. Just try to get the idea out there, because later, once you've repeated this enough times in a numerous context with different people, you'll get the reception that you want. People will really feel interested and engaged with what you're saying. It's one
yes,
of
yes,
the best skills that you can learn is to be a good storyteller in any language.
yes, yes, I agree with you. Yes,
Yeah, it's a really misunderstood part of language is people don't have the patience for the repetition, and repetition is everything.
language in general, I think are so useful and at the same time are so interesting. Uh, we can share different ideas, yes, ideas, experience by speaking or yes, by speaking.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the goal, right? It's to communicate.
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
it's not a logical process speaking. I think people think that it's a logical process. It's not. It's something that plays out in the back of your mind and just naturally occurs. This is why translations don't work, right? Because it takes too much time. It's too cumbersome as a process. It's you can't go, okay, word for word, this is what it is in Spanish, this is what it's going to be in English, right?
yes,
It's too long, especially if you've got to formulate a really big, grand idea. It's something natural, it's rapid fire. And generally, how you would prepare for, say, more complex conversations, say if you were debating a topic or something like that, you would have read a lot of material. You would have through this, that's a repetition aspect through multiple contexts of what you're reading, and you will be able to form your opinion and be able to express it in the language just based on everything you've read and experienced and the conversations that you've had. It's all a combination of those things together.
yes, 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 I agree with you.
Yes. I, I hope more people start doing this. It will make their language learning journey a lot easier.
Yes,
Well, Ximena, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you for so much joining me on this podcast.
yes, I really enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot about your experience as a teacher and your advice about speaking is very helpful. I will try to practice all topics, issues from this conversation in order to improve my fluencies, maintain my ideas, and if you ask me, I would like to have a conversation in English every day.
Oh, definitely. Wouldn't that be
Oh,
amazing to have?
yes, yes, yes. It would be so nice for me.
For sure. Well, and to the audience, thank you for tuning in and watching this episode. And we'll see you again on the next episode. Goodbye for now.
Bye bye.